Anytime you are using masking techniques when you're painting, whether that's using masking tape or transfer tape or even a vinyl mask to mask off an area and then spraying additional layers of paint over those masked areas, you are creating edges on the surface. Let me explain with a pair of these small artboards. Let's say this is the surface of your project. You've already got paint applied and or artwork applied to this surface, and now you want to mask off a portion of this in order to spray another color. So if we were to mask off about half of this panel so that we could spray more paint on this side of it, what would happen is once that paint is applied, we now have, when the masking is removed, a raised edge. Now, granted, this is very exaggerated because I'm using two boards, but I now have an edge where the newest paint is sitting and the older paint is sitting. There's a definite raised edge. Now, it depends on how many layers of paint you're applying as far as how prevalent that raised edge is going to be. If you're spraying just one quick light to mid coat of another color, chances are you'll get away with it just fine. It becomes an issue when you're spraying 3, 4, or even more layers of paint in the masked area. For example, here's a side cover of the motorcycle, and you can see that I masked off these areas and sprayed green over the top of the existing artwork, which is also why I was very concerned about the candies not bleeding in my previous video. This is a tri-stage paint, meaning the initial layer that I sprayed was just the base coat color layer. Then there's another coat of a pearl using UVLS gloss as the carrier, and then the final stage is the final clear coat. I'm not ready for the final clear coat yet because there's still some more artwork that needs to be done on these parts. So the idea here is this green paint is tearing away and revealing the artwork underneath. What happened though, because I used a tri-stage color for the top coat or the base coat, the actual color of the motorcycle that the client wanted, is after masking all of this off, there is a paint edge around all of these edges. It's not that bad, but there's definitely an edge around all of this green that I created. That can become a problem if you're masking off graphics and you plan to pinstripe the edges of those graphics. If you don't level those edges back out, there's a pretty good chance that you'll still see that edge after you've pinstriped over it. Another problem when it comes to further artwork, like I said, this is going to be, the green paint is supposed to be tearing away and revealing the artwork underneath. So I want to come in and create the little metal curls that you often see in these types of paint jobs. When I'm masking off those little ripped edges and curls on this surface, I can run into the same problem. If I have that raised edge and I paint over that to create those curls and that ripped edge, there's a good chance you'll still be able to see that masked line when it's finished. I don't want that. I also think that anytime you're doing custom paint, once the job is finished, you should be able to run your hand or whatever else you want to run over the top of the paint job, and it should be glass smooth. You shouldn't feel any edges at all, in my opinion. So I prefer to bury all of these and level out the surface that I'm working on before I continue with the rest of the artwork. There are a couple different methods you can use to level out the surface of your project, and the key is using a medium to high solids clear coat. In cases where the artwork is complete, I am ready for the final clear coat, I will go ahead and use a catalyzed automotive urethane clear, apply 2 to 3 good coats, and then once that's cured, I can come back in and wet sand it with 600 grit sandpaper to flatten out the surface before I apply the last and final clear coats. In cases where I still have artwork that needs to be applied, like this case for example, I choose to use Createx UVLS Gloss 4050 Clear. The 4050 is a medium solids clear and it works really well for this process. Here you can see me spraying one of the saddlebag covers. I use 3 to 4 good coats, and you may need more, you may need less. It depends on how heavy your masked edge is. I usually use 3 to 4 medium wet coats, and you want each coat to be completely dry before you apply the subsequent coat. Medium wet means a milky surface. Once you've applied the paint, it should look a little bit milky. It will dry clear once it's cured. But I want to build layers of paint so that I can come back in and level out the surface once this is cured. The edges on this particular project, again, are not that bad. 3 or 4 good coats should give me more than enough product and material on the surface in order to come back and flatten this back out once the clear coat has cured. I was obviously using a spray gun with a 1.3 millimeter fluid tip and needle to spray the UVLS gloss onto these parts, keeping about a 50% overlap, and I reduced the UVLS gloss clear at about a 4-to-1 ratio, meaning 4 parts UVLS gloss clear to 1 part reducer. The reduction that I was using was actually a little bit of a cocktail. I was using 2 parts of 4011 reducer to 1 part 4020 automotive reducer. The reason behind that is it's a little bit cooler where I'm at this point in time in the year, and it's a little bit humid. So adding a little bit of the 4020 automotive reducer to the mix helps it flash and cure a little bit faster. So let's talk about some of the pros and cons when it comes to using a 2K automotive urethane clear versus the water-based Createx 4050 UVLS gloss clear for the purpose of smoothing out your surface. Does it save you time? It does, but probably not in the way that some of you might think it does. An automotive grade urethane clear generally requires between 12 to 48 hours before the product can be sanded after it was applied. That's going to vary greatly depending on the brand of clear that you like to use, but I've seen those windows range from the 12 to 48 hour mark. Generally, it's about 12 hours, so let's just call it overnight. The UVLS gloss clear, according to the technical data sheet, can be sanded after waiting a minimum of 6 hours after the application. Again, that's according to the technical data sheet. I still prefer to allow it to sit overnight, so probably closer to the same 12-hour window that I would have with a solvent-based clear. I want to make sure that that clear is good and cured before I start sanding on it with sandpaper. So that doesn't really save me any time. Where it does save me a lot of time is because I'm planning on putting artwork over the top of this clear once I've leveled the surface. With a 2K urethane clear, I do not like to put paint on top of that fresh clear until it's set for a minimum of 3 to 4 days. There's a very specific reason why I do that, and it's because a 2K automotive urethane clear generally takes about 30 days to fully cure and harden. Within that first week after it's sprayed, it's still off-gassing. It's still allowing the solvents to evaporate from the finish. That's why you still smell that strong smell of a urethane clear for a week or so after the clear has been sprayed. If you spray subsequent layers of paint over that fresh clear before those solvents have evaporated, you're locking them in, and chances are you're going to have problems because that clear is probably never going to fully cure like it should. So I wait a minimum of 3 to 4 days before I put artwork over the top of a fresh 2K catalyzed urethane clear. UVLS, on the other hand, as soon as it's set for the 12 hours and I've sanded it, I'm good to go ahead and finish what I was doing or continue what I was doing. I don't have any problems putting paint over the UVLS as soon as it's finished being sanded. So it does save time in that sense. What about durability? Hands down, a urethane-based catalyzed clear is going to be far more durable than UVLS. So in instances where your future artwork might be using erasing techniques or scratching techniques with, especially if you're using razor blades or an X-Acto knife for the scratching techniques, or even an electric eraser to bring back highlights and things, I would definitely recommend taking the extra steps and the extra time to use a 2K automotive based clear. UVLS will stand up to some light erasing. It's not going to stand up to an electric eraser very well. It's very easy to go through the finish. Ask me how I know. So in terms of durability, the 2K automotive grade urethane clear is obviously going to be far more durable than the UVLS gloss. What about when it comes to sanding the products? Both sand very well. You'll see that here in a few minutes on the UVLS side. The advantage to the 2K automotive urethane clear is I prefer generally to wet sand my finish. I use 600 grit on both. It doesn't matter whether I'm using the automotive 2K or the UVLS. I'm still using 600 grit sandpaper. Wet sanding the urethane clear, it sands really nicely, and that again depends somewhat on the brand of paint that you like. I use House of Color for my stuff, so it sands really well. And the nice thing about it is it doesn't clog up your sandpaper. It remains pretty clean. The downside with UVLS, it does sand really well, but you have to dry sand it because it is a water-based product, and it tends to gum up your sandpaper relatively quickly. You'll see that when we get to the sanding portion here in a few minutes. But both of them sand really well. The other advantage when it comes to sanding with the UVLS compared to the 2K clear is the fact that solvent-based paint has working windows, meaning there are two types of adhesion that you have when we're talking about painting. You either have chemical adhesion or you have mechanical adhesion. Mechanical adhesion is when you take a piece of sandpaper or a Scotch-Brite pad and you're sanding scratches into the surface. That gives the paint something to bite into and stick to. Chemical adhesion is when the paint is chemically bonding to itself. In the solvent-based paint world, you lose that chemical adhesion after a certain period of time. Again, that depends on the brand of paint that you're using. There are ways around it. Pretty much you can either scuff the surface lightly with a Scotch-Brite pad to give yourself mechanical adhesion, and sometimes it might require using an intercoat clear as well as scuffing the surface in order to extend that working window. The water-based Createx world doesn't have working windows. The paint adheres to itself regardless of how long it's been. I could literally come back to something after a year, start painting on it again without doing anything else other than maybe cleaning the surface off, and the paint will bond to itself. That's one of the big reasons why I switched to the Createx water-based paint system. So those are the pros and cons. Now let's take a look at actually sanding and leveling the surface out. I went ahead and sprayed 4 coats of the 4050 UVLS gloss clear onto this side cover off camera, and you can still feel some of these taped edges even with the clear coat applied, but some of them are already relatively smooth. When I masked this off, I was actually tearing the masking tape in order to make it look more like it was torn, and that causes a little bit more of a rough edge in some areas, which is typical when you're using this method. So this is set long enough now that we can begin sanding. To do that, I use 3M 600 grit sandpaper. And the key here is to use a light touch. I'm not putting a lot of pressure on the panel itself. I'm letting the sandpaper do its job, and I hope this will show up on camera. Also keep a microfiber towel or anything you can use to kind of wipe off the sanding from the surface. When the sandpaper starts getting caked up, I'll slap it on my jeans in order to clean it off a little bit. Hopefully you can see on the camera now that I've sanded around this little torn section here, that there's still a shiny spot all the way around it. That's what I'm trying to get rid of. I can still feel that edge. It's smooth now, but I can still feel there's a raised area there. I just want to work that area lightly until it feels like it's at the same level. I don't want to be able to feel that little bump with my finger. It's also important not to go too far, because we have 4 coats of the UVLS gloss clear on this side cover. It's not difficult to sand through that UVLS. It is a medium build or medium solids clear coat, so there is some build here. But if you get really carried away and go to town sanding on this thing, it's not difficult and it won't take very long before you'll sand through it. That feels much better. I still feel a little bit of it right close to the edge. You want to be very careful when you're getting close to edges as well, because that's even easier to sand through. This edge is actually a little bit of a rounded curve, so I'm not as concerned. I'm going to work on the edge of it there just a little bit more. That's much better. So again, that's all it takes. All I'm trying to do is make the green paint on the same level as the other paint, the existing paint that was painted before the green was added. I'll go over the entire side cover the same way. When it comes to your edges, I prefer to use a gray Scotch-Brite pad. Again, it's very easy to burn through, especially on a sharp edge. Pretty much all the edges on this side cover are rounded, but even on the rounded edges, once I'm finished sanding, I'll come in with a gray Scotch-Brite pad and just go over the edges lightly. And that's pretty good right there. So all of this takes some time, it takes some effort on your part, but the extra time and the extra effort you put into it really makes a big difference when it comes to how the finished product turns out. I'll leave links in the description below to all the products that I've used in this video. I hope you got something out of this. If you did, remember to like, subscribe, and share. I'm Trevor with Wicked Art Studio. I will see you all next time.